Okay, so we're going to take a look at the syllabus first here, the EVT syllabus, and then we'll get into the program. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and minimize this stuff, put her down here. All right, so this is course EVT 155. It's called Site Mapping and GIS, and really it has more to do with kind of CAD applications and then geographic information systems. As I said, I'm going to be your instructor for the first piece of the course, and then Amy will be for the second piece. My contact information is right there. That james.deckert@cincinnati-state.edu is my direct email, and then of course that 5691-1757 is my direct line. Amy is an adjunct instructor. She does work, I believe, at the EPA, and but she does have that Cincinnati State email, so she can be contacted there. Or you can contact her by phone. I believe that's her personal phone. So if you need to get a hold of her, that works well. Okay. So I don't really have posted office hours this semester, but like I said, I'm going to be really flexible and available. And one of the things I want to let you guys know is that on Wednesdays I can be there before the class starts. Or I can be there after. So I think our class goes on Wednesdays from 4 to 6:50, so I can come in at 2 or 3 and be there available, till, later in the evening as well. And I believe Amy won't be as flexible coming in early, but I think she told me that she can make it, later on the evening on Wednesdays. So, okay. So we will be doing our Zoom lectures on Monday evenings, 4 to 5:50, and then I'll be recording them. So if you can't make it for some reason, they will be posted under the week folder that we'll be looking at, and then you'll be able to get that information, okay? All right, so definitely we will be meeting face-to-face at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. That's going to be in room 223 main campus. Okay, so that's the old building that was closed down for a year, and or not quite a year, but now they're back up and running. So that's all good news now. All right, let's look at, let's see, I think everything else is pretty straightforward here. Let's go to the required text. There is a required text that you guys need to get for the GIS portion, that GIS tutorial for ArcGIS Pro 2.6. So make sure you have that available. That will be needed, I believe, about July 12th is when you'll start into the GIS component, and that's when that will be important, okay? So make sure you have it by then, because everything you do in that section is out of that book. Now for our piece, we don't really need a book unless you're really looking for one. You want to get a little bit more information on CAD and those kind of things. There is a book available, this AutoCAD 2020 Instructor by James Leach. I think they have it at the bookstore, but if not, you could probably get it through Amazon pretty easily. The good news is that the 2020 book is really kind of outdated because the software is at least 2 years old at this point, that 2020 version. So you can probably get those books used at a pretty decent price. So you don't need that one because that one's, like I said, just optional, but make sure that you get this required one by, like I said, July 12th. Some things that you might consider for this class: bring something to store your files on, because you want to make sure that you have access to them. So a flash drive, it doesn't have to be a huge capacity, but just some kind of flash drive or something that you can use to save your files to. That's important. And I would bring a book, a notebook of some kind, to take some notes. Of course, we'll be doing most of our lecture via Zoom, but I'll always try to do some kind of things that we do on Wednesday, just in case we need to go through some things before we get into lab. So primarily, I want to look at Wednesday being our lab time, okay? So that way, I'll be giving you assignments that you can work, and we can go together on stuff one-on-one if we need it, all right? So let's see. Let's take a look at the policies. I mean, one of the things, of course, attendance is important to this course. If you don't attend the lecture or the lab, you're not going to do very well in either section. Now, again, because the the lectures are going to be recorded and posted. You'll have the ability to look at those at a later time. So, but missing a lab is probably not good. So a Wednesday night is not a good day to miss if you can avoid it, because that's where we can really work. Like I said, if you're really struggling on stuff, I can go through stuff really easily that way. Okay. So our grading criteria is probably what you've normally used to in most of the classes you've taken. So 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, 70, 79 is a C. You know, most people are going to be A's and B's in this class as long as you're doing, as long as you're turning in your labs. That shouldn't be an issue. Okay. And I also am not real rigid on these numbers, you know, so if you're coming to class and you're working hard and you know you're working on your labs and you're at an 89, you're probably not going to get a B. You're certainly going to get an A. So I like to look at overall performance, not just strict numerics and that. And also, I guess you're probably used to that, but we post all of the grades out on Blackboard. So you should always pay attention to what the grading book is saying in Blackboard, just to make sure that, you know, I have grades for the labs that you've turned in, particularly if you turned in a lab and I don't have a grade out there, you need to let us know that. Same thing with Amy once you get into that. So because this class is somewhat abbreviated, you know, 15 weeks to 10 weeks, we've kind of scuttled some of the things. We normally do tests in this class, but because of the time frame, what we've done is we're just going to do it based on labs. So we've got AutoCAD labs and GIS labs. So each piece is going to be 50%. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. And again, if you don't turn in a lab, though, that could be detrimental to your grade. So that's going to be one thing you need to make sure that you're focusing in on that and make sure you're turning in grades or turning in labs, excuse me. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Anybody has? All right. Well, let's go. This is kind of what I would call the basic crux of what we're going to be getting into. This is showing us the kind of the roadmap, what we're going to be dealing with. And what I've done is broken it down by week, concentration area, lecture topics, and then chapters. Now these chapters here are focused on that Leach book. So don't worry about that if you don't have the book, because you won't have anything to really look at there. When you get down to the section on GIS, which is down in here, these are out of that GIS Pro 2.6 book. So it looks like you're going to be doing 5 chapters out of that, where they have tutorials and all the reading comes right out of there. So that'll be important. Okay. Now, again, let's look at this a minute, because this is what we're going to be focusing on. What I'm going to be talking about is primarily AutoCAD and CAD in general. So what you're seeing here in the lecture topics, you're seeing some of these things in uppercase and some of them in lowercase. One of the things to understand is when you see it in lowercase, it's primarily just a concept associated with AutoCAD. But when you see uppercase, like most of these things are, like units, line, arc, those are actually going to be commands in AutoCAD. So that means you can actually type that command in or click it on an icon to have it execute. So you notice what we're going to be looking at is a lot of different commands. We're going to start out with basic draw commands this week and continue on with draw commands next week, and file handling, that kind of stuff. Then we'll be taking a look at object selection, layer commands, and then ultimately edit commands. So we're going to be doing quite a bit, but in 5 weeks it's pretty quick. So you're not going to be getting a lot in depth, but you'll get enough to be able to do a pretty decent job in CAD if you get into that. When you get into the GIS portion, again, you're not going to be dealing it with too in depth. There's a lot to GIS, just like there is to CAD. But again, in the 5-week time frame, if you do find yourself on a position where you're working with GIS or you're working with CAD, you're going to be proficient enough to be able to get to do things with it, not just be out of the loop with it. Okay. So this is going to be an important picture right here to take. That's going to be what we kind of focus in on that. So if you haven't printed this out, I would probably suggest that you do, just to have it handy. And then you'll know, for instance, if you miss a week or something, what we're going to be heading for, what we're going to be doing. Also, with each topic that we get into, there will basically be a lab. So notice I'm gonna have you do basically 5 topics. So we're gonna be doing 5 labs. And these labs, the one thing to understand about them, they are building types of labs. So doing lab 1 is important so that when you get into lab 2, you know what you're doing, and then from lab 2 to lab 3. So if you're getting behind on this stuff, that's going to make it really hard to get caught up. Not that you can't get caught up, but it just makes it hard, okay? And you really can't do the labs out of sequence. So if you haven't done lab 2 and you've already completed 1 and you want to work on 3, it's probably not suggested to do that. You want to try to make sure you finish them, okay? I do have due dates down here. I'm not going to be 100% sticky on that. I mean, if you turn them in a little bit after that, it's okay. But you want to try to focus on those due dates so that you keep on track with what's going on. Because like I said, the last section that I'll have you guys for is that week of 7/7, July 7th. And after that, then I'll be handing that off to Amy, and she'll start on the 12th. So if you don't have labs due by then, or you still owe me labs, you can still turn them in. Okay, I do want you to understand that even though it says that all labs are due by July 7th, I will still take them. But everything has to be done by the August 11th date, because that's when the class essentially ends, and then we also have to get, we have to be able to get in grades, okay? Anybody questions on any of this? These 2 sheets are pretty important. Any questions? This one in particular gives us everything that we're going to focus in on, and then this is just kind of showing us due dates. Amy doesn't have anything down here yet. I'm sure she'll be going over that as soon as she gets into that. No questions anybody has? All right, well, the last of this is just kind of showing you things like no-show policy and withdrawing from a class. Those kind of things. So read through that, and if you have any questions, we can definitely take a look at it. For technical issues, for one thing, I'm sure that you might be aware of this, but they do have a help desk here, which is really helpful when if you have computer issues, let's say at work and or home. Sometimes they can really help you out. So that 569-1234 number is really good to keep in track of. Let's see, I think, let's see, I think we're in pretty good shape. Now, there are some things changing rapidly with the COVID-19. You may have seen that they put out some new guidelines. They still want us to be somewhat distanced in classrooms. They're kind of saying that as long as everybody's vaccinated and everybody feels okay about it, you don't need to wear masks. I would suggest that maybe bringing a mask with you just to have it in case, we want to go that way. I'll be bringing my mask, and then, as long as they say we're 6 feet apart, we're probably okay with it. And I'm fully vaccinated, and I don't know how many other people are, but so I can go either way. Okay. So just be prepared for that. That would probably be the important thing. All right. So that's our syllabus. Does anybody have any questions on any of that before we start to move on? Okay, so that is located. Let's look at the site a minute. If we look at the site here, that's located under the start section. So you always have access to that right here if you want to create that or look at that or print a copy out. Okay, so that'll be there. Then I've got it broken down into weeks. Right now you only have 1 week active. I made this active the other day. So you have that ability to get into this, and every week I'll open these up. So this week, what we're going to be looking at is the introduction to AutoCAD, talking about that. And these are the commands that we're going to be getting into. Now, I might not get into everything today, so if I don't get done with everything today, I'll finish this up on Wednesday, and then we'll get started in our assignment 1 on Wednesday. Okay, so that's kind of be where we're headed. There is another lecture handout I have here. You might want to go ahead and print that out if you haven't, or open that up. It will look like this. We're going to be talking about coordinates today. So if you have the ability to print that out, or you just want to keep that tab open, that'll be really good. Okay. I printed a copy of mine as well. Now I will have, this is where, notice right now it has a lecture week 1. There will be a YouTube link on this as soon as I get this one posted. This was from last year, so right now this is hidden to you guys. You can't see that, as well as this assignment 1. Once I get the assignment up there and posted on Wednesday, this will be open. So you will see this probably tonight. This lecture 1 will be open tonight, and then assignment 1 will be open on Wednesday. Okay. Any questions anybody has? Everybody good so far? Okay. So we're going to talk about AutoCAD then a little bit, and then get started into taking a look at some of the concepts. Let me ask, has anybody ever done any CAD or GIS? Anybody? I think there's only 3 of you there right now. Nobody's done any CAD, or nobody's done any geographic information system GIS type work?
I did the AutoCAD last semester.
Okay, all right. So what about the GIS?
Did a little bit and then took an incomplete and retaken the course.
Okay, good, good. That's Ian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Glad you're back.
Yep.
All right, good. All right, so I'm assuming that most everybody else does not have any knowledge of it, and that's all good because this is a basic level course. Okay, so you're right where you need to be. So we're going to talk about CAD first, and I'm going to let Amy talk about GIS, but they're somewhat related. But CAD is primarily stands for computer-aided drafting or computer-aided design. So you can look at it kind of 2 different ways. AutoCAD is primarily a drafting package because it's not very hard. It's not very easy to design with, but to draw with it's very, very compatible with that. So primarily when we see that CAD, we're looking at a computer-aided drafting package. Now, having said that, it's very, very powerful. So there's a lot to it and a lot that it can do. And if you've ever done any manual drafting, most people probably haven't done that in a long time. I did years and years and years of it when I was out in industry. So once I saw a program like a CAD program, I mean, it was just an incredible experience for me to be able to go from drawing everything with pencil and paper, and then all of a sudden going into CAD, which is just really amazing to see. So this thing works really, really nicely. AutoCAD has a lot of functionality to it. It does look a little confusing at first, so that's the biggest thing. It'll seem a little bit overwhelming even. The one thing I'll tell you, it does kind of have a little bit of a steep learning curve at first, but once you get your feet on the ground with it, then you'll take off with it. So it's pretty easy once you get going with it. So about the first week or 2, if you feel a little frustrated with it, that's normal, okay? But by the time we get to the 3rd week, everybody should be really, really picking it up quick. And also, if you're good with geometry and coordinates and those kind of things, you'll probably pick it up quicker than other people will, okay? So that's kind of where we're headed. So I want to introduce AutoCAD today. I want to talk about the graphical user interface because that's a real important thing. That's probably one of the more overwhelming things about it. We'll talk about the concept of what we call objects, extents, and limits. And we're going to look at coordinates and units. And I'm going to try to get into some of these draw commands today. If I don't, like I said, I'll just pick up with those and finish those off on Wednesday. And then we'll get started into our first lab. Okay. So what I would like you to do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to launch AutoCAD. So just go ahead, if you've got AutoCAD loaded, great. You can just click on the icon. If you don't have AutoCAD loaded, that's not going to be a problem. Just sit back and watch what's going on. And then when we get to class on Wednesday, we'll go back through it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and close my AutoCAD just to show you what it looks like when it starts up. Okay, so I've got mine down here on the taskbar. I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. And notice mine is version 2020. Okay, so it's going to do a little bit of a load like this. Okay, and it'll usually bring you to a view like this. Okay, so if you do have AutoCAD and you get it loaded, go ahead and we'll get to that. Okay, is everybody ready to go on? Solomon, were you able to get yours downloaded?
I was just still downloading.
Oh, it's still downloaded. Okay. All right. Well, just
Yeah.
go ahead and just watch it then. All right. And Ian, what about you? Do you have it loaded?
No, I do not.
Okay, great, great. And Dima, yours is good. Is it opening up?
I'm trying to open it now.
Okay.
Um,
Let me know when you're ready, okay?
Okay.
And if it doesn't for some reason, like I said, don't worry about it because we'll pick up with this on Wednesday if it's an issue. Just watch. Just let me know though if it does show up, okay? I might not have mentioned this, but one thing about if you have a Macintosh computer, you can get a Mac version of AutoCAD, but it doesn't usually look the same way as the Windows version. So you can use it though, but there isn't a
that's
Mac.
I think what I'm having right now. I did get the Mac version.
Oh, you do? Do you have a Mac?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
it's not a problem. It's just that yours will look a little different. Okay, so yeah, just go ahead and load it up if you want, but it'll probably look a little different than what mine does. Okay, but everything's going to be there. Same things will be there, right? Also, and I think the college still has this available, but if you want to get a loaner computer from the college, they have them available. I think you can, there's a couple of forms you fill out and they'll loan you a laptop that you can use for the semester if you want to go that route as well. The Macintoshes though will not work with the GIS software. I just want to tell you that up front. So that's kind of the problem with that. But the Windows the Mac version of AutoCAD works just fine. It just looks different. That's all. Okay. Is everybody ready to go in then? Take a look at it. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to open files. Number one, if you already have a file that you were working on recently, a lot of the times it just shows up down here. You can just click on it and it'll load it. If you just want to begin a brand new file, there's a couple of ways to do it, but the easiest way to do it is to just hit this plus right here, and it'll go ahead and launch you into a new session. Okay, so what we're looking at here, what we're looking at is basically an electronic piece of paper. And you can see on mine, I have a grid. And this actually is not a two-dimensional world, it's actually 3D. So the Z values are actually coming towards me or going into the screen. And then you can see where the X is going in this direction, left to right, and the Y is going up and down. Now we'll be exclusively doing everything two-dimensionally, but AutoCAD is a fully three-dimensional program. So you have the ability to be able to do that, okay? So we're going to take a look at the graphical user interface. That's what this thing is. And like I said, if you do have that Mac version, it may look a little bit different, but everything is still there. And I believe for a Mac, there is a way to make it look like or emulate a Windows version. I'm not sure how to do that, but I'm pretty sure it can be done. So if you do want to set it that way, that's a useful property. So let's start over here with this A. This is, a lot of people think that stands for AutoCAD, but what that really stands for is the application menu. So the application menu, if you click on that little down arrow right there, what it'll do is it'll give you a group of menus. So all of these guys are little icons that take you to different aspects. These are primarily file handling types of things. So you can begin a new drawing, open an existing drawing, save a drawing, save as, export and import. And then you can do other things like utilities. Okay, so it's primarily, that application menu is primarily dealing with file handling. So right next to it is another menu, this guy right here. This is called your quick access toolbar. And the quick access toolbar really has all of the same things that the application menu does. So you notice there's the application menu, new, open, save, and there's your new, open, save, save as. So really it's just two ways to get to the same thing. There's a few things here on the quick access that are different than are here and vice versa, but in general, they're the same. So the one thing that you have are what are called workspaces in AutoCAD, and that's what this guy is called. This is a workspace. And you can think of a workspace as a palette of tools that you're using for a particular application. So you notice if I drop this down, we have a drafting and annotation workspace. We have a 3D basics. We have a 3D modeling, or you can create your own. It's good to know that this exists because sometimes if you do something with a menu, you can corrupt it and then it doesn't look the way it used to look. And that can be really, particularly when you're a beginning user, that can really throw you for a loop. So what I'll a lot of times do to fix that is if you go to your workspace, you just open this up and select one of the other workspaces. Notice what it'll do is it'll change the tools. And then if I just go back to the drafting and annotation, anything that I had screwed up or corrupted usually fixes. So that's a good way to do that. Okay. You can also modify this thing or customize it, and that's what this little drop down arrow right here is for. So if I open that up, what you'll see is any of the commands that are on the quick access toolbar right now have the check in front of them, but you can add other ones in here. Okay, so if I want to say I want properties in there or layers, any of these other ones, I can turn those on or I can turn things off. So I can create different aspects to the way that looks. Okay, so we'll be using probably both of these areas. I pretty much, if I just want to save something, I'm probably going to come here as opposed to here. But there are some things a little bit different in the application menu versus the quick access. Okay, so the other thing you see right here is this guy. This is called the AutoCAD title bar right here, and it usually tells you the name of the drawing. And it probably says like drawing1.dwg right now. Usually it's just that because the way we opened this, it's just a generic file. And it calls it drawing1 or drawing2 or drawing3. The .dwg is an important thing. That's called the extension. And that references the fact that you are working under a drawing file format. So that's a proprietary file for AutoCAD. So no other program can really open up a DWG file. There are a few CAD programs that can, but primarily that's the type of file that you're going to be saving when working with an AutoCAD is what's called a .dwg file, and that stands for drawing file. Now every time you save, you'll also get another file called a .bak, and that's a backup file. So the backup file and the drawing file are really essentially the same file, except they're one generation removed. So if you're saving every 5 minutes, the backup file will be 5 minutes different than the file you're working on, okay? If you save every 5 hours, the backup file is going to be 5 hours difference, okay? So it's just a way, though, that if you crash your file or destroy that DWG file, you can actually rename your backup file. And then you can actually have that file and edit it. So that we'll talk a lot about that a little bit more on Wednesday because we're going to be doing saves on Wednesday. We're not going to worry about that today. Just to show you that that exists. Once you actually save it with a name, now, like for instance, if I called this file Decker Lab 1, it would then replace the name DWG Drawing 1 with Decker Lab 1 or whatever we named it. All right, so the next area in the graphical user interface is over here. This is called your information center. And you can search things here. So this is kind of a way to help. So if you're looking for information, you can type a keyword in there. You can search things. You can actually log into AutoCAD from here, or Autodesk rather, and get information that way. So there's a lot of different things in there. Probably won't use this too much, but sometimes if I'm looking or searching for something, I can type it in here. That's a nice way of doing that. Okay. All right, so the main menu in AutoCAD is this guy right here. We're going to spend the most time in this semester, this piece of the semester that we're going to be working in. This is called the ribbon, and the ribbon is broken down into different sections. So you have what are called tabs. Notice right now I have what's called the Home tab active. And again, you can think of that as a palette of tools that you're associated with. So in the Home tab, we have a lot of different tools. Now the tools are associated or aggregated together under what are called panels. So we have under the Home tab, you have the Draw panel, you have the Modify panel, the Annotation panel, the Layers panel, Blocks. So you can see all of those are how those are set. And so when we look at the Draw panel, these commands are all associated with commands that will allow you to draw objects, such as a line or a P line, a circle. And then if you notice, this also has a little drop down. There's another group of commands underneath that are also useful to draw stuff with, but they're not used as much. So think of that like a drawer that opens up if you want to, okay? Now if I go to the Modify commands, these are all commands that are going to be used to modify objects, and we're going to be getting into those pretty heavy this week, or not this week, excuse me, this semester. And again, there's also things that open up that way. So, so you have the tab, and then you have panels, and in this case, you've got several different panels. If you go to another tab, for instance, the Annotate tab, you'll notice now the tools completely change. Now, some of the tools that are on here are also on the Home tab. So there's a lot of redundancy, if you will, on AutoCAD. So that's one thing that's kind of important to understand. Makes it a little hard at first, but I would say there's probably 4 ways to get to every command. Okay, so 4 different ways. And that again, kind of makes it hard at first when you're learning this stuff. But the good news is we're going to pretty much just stay in the Home tab. But notice under the Annotate tab, then you have the Text panel, Dimensions panel. Okay, so you can kind of see how that works. All right, so we're going to go back to the Home tab. I'm going to show you a few other things. So besides this guy that opens up another group of commands, or like a drawer, as I said, there are some other types of little things that will happen. If you go to, like, say, the properties, you'll notice there's a little arrow that's kind of pointing to the southeast. If you click on that, this opens up this guy, which we call a dialog box. So normally when you see one of those little guys like pointing that way, okay, or pointing, there's one there, those are going to give you what are called dialog boxes. Okay, so an arrow straight down is just going to give you another drawer that opens up. An arrow like this will give you what's called a dialog box. So notice there's a dialog box, and I've got a dialog box here that should open up. Doesn't look like it did it for some reason. Maybe it's taking its time. They don't always work the way you want them to. Looks like it locked me out. Oh, there it is. It took a while. Okay, so yeah. So those are some of the things that you're going to see. Okay. A couple other things as we look at this. Within the panel, so you have a collection of tools. So these are actually what you would call commands. So line is a line command. Polyline is the polyline, the P-line command. Circle is the circle command. And I want you to notice also what's kind of neat about this. If you actually set this down here like this, you'll notice that it comes out, it gives you a little bit of information about what that command will do for you. So that's kind of cool. And down below it, let me open it up. Down below it, it actually shows you the exact name of that command. So notice at the top, it says the name is P-line. This won't work for me. But the actual name of the command or it says it's polyline, but the actual name is P-line. So there are some differences in what you see. Now, if we go to circle, notice circle has a little drop-down arrow within it. So when I do that, these are called sub-options. So these are not actual separate commands. Those are all sub-options within the circle command. So what we're looking at here is we see, for instance, circle sub-option center radius, center diameter, 2 point, 3 point. All of those are gotten through the circle command. Arc has a lot of sub-options. Notice all the sub-options. We'll be talking about some of those either today or probably Wednesday, to be honest with you, because we're going to probably run out of time before we get there. You also see a couple of them that have little arrows to the side. Now those are usually showing you that you have more commands underneath that button. So if I click that little arrow, notice that has both the rectangle command and the polygon command, okay? So if the arrow is below it, like that, it's a sub-option. If the arrow is to the side, there's a command under a command. So again, we go here, trim, Trim has both extend and trim. So those are two separate commands. All right. So again, those are some of the confusing things you'll see as we get into this. We will be utilizing the ribbon a lot. So just remember the ribbon is composed of tabs, panels, and then commands within each panel. Well, the other thing that can happen with your ribbon is it can change its look, and that's because there's several different looks. If you go over here, you can cycle through so that it can look like that. So that's my ribbon, but it's for a person that really knows what they're looking at. So, you know, they don't have to see all that stuff. But if you do lose everything, all you have to do is cycle that through a couple of times, and it'll bring you back to your normal ribbon. So notice it goes from that look to that look to that look to that look to that look. Okay, so if you ever lose your ribbon, you didn't really lose it. It's just because it's cycled through all those different looks. Okay, everybody doing okay so far? Anybody questions? Okay, if I'm going too fast or you have a question, don't hesitate to stop me, and we'll handle it. Okay. Also, if there's something that you want me to discuss further, just take a note, jot it down, and then we can look at it Wednesday. Okay, so that'll be important. Okay, now let's go over here. This is called your view cube. This is allowing you to look in a three-dimensional view. Now, I would suggest probably not messing with this too much, but I'm going to change it up a little bit. I want to show you if I click on this thing, I can change the look. Notice you can clearly see that I'm in a three-dimensional view, kind of looking down from the corner. You have to be careful with this because you know we're not going to be working in 3 dimensions. So I'm going to suggest that you make sure that you're always at a top view, and that this is rotated so north is up. Now this can look like it's top view, but it really won't be top view. So your best bet is to make sure over here that it says 2D wireframe and top. So if you're not sure, always just come over here, make sure it says top, and make sure you're in what's called a 2D wireframe, okay? Because like I said, you can have this just cocked a little bit and it'll look like it's top view, but it really isn't. And that can do some things to you that are not going to work very well for you, okay? All right, let's go down here. This guy is called your command window, and mine is loose, it's floating. So if I notice that pattern of dots, if I click on that and drag it, I can drag that thing around. And this is called your command line or your command window. So this is a very important aspect in AutoCAD. It's one of the only programs that still has this. This gives me the ability to actually type commands in AutoCAD. So if I know the name of a command, I can type it in this thing instead of selecting it up here. And that's cool because sometimes it's quicker to access a command just by typing it. And you can type in either the full name or you can type in what's called its alias. So for instance, the line command, the name of the command is line, L-I-N-E, or its alias is L. So if you know aliases, they go really quick. So that's kind of a cool aspect. Now, this command window can be placed anywhere. Normally, I like it docked. So what that means is I'm going to dock it down at the bottom. And when you dock it, it kind of locks in place. This is nice because it just keeps it down there always and I don't have to worry about it. The other thing is the command line is going to show you information down here. So when you have that command line open like this, when you type stuff or you know, you're doing something in AutoCAD, the command line is going to echo information to you. So if it's waiting for you to enter a distance or something like that, it's going to tell you down here. Okay, so that's really kind of an important aspect. When you begin learning and working in AutoCAD, this is a good place to really focus your attention. Also, the size of the command line can be increased. So if I come down here and just touch the top of the window, I get that double-headed arrow. If I left click, I can make that thing bigger or I can make it smaller. Now, I don't suggest you have more than about 3 lines because if you have more than that, then you start to lose this area right here. And this is where all the action happens. This is your piece of paper. So you want to make sure that you have as much room there as possible. Okay. As we're going to get into this, you're going to see how the command line is going to echo information to us. Okay, so let's look at this aspect down here. Down here you'll see a tab that says Model, and then you'll see two other ones that are called Layout 1, Layout 2. So there's two, if you will, dimensions in AutoCAD, or world views, how you want to look at it. One is called the Model world, and the other one is the Layout world. And this used to be called paper space. You probably still, I use that term still, because when I started working with AutoCAD, and I've been working with it for what, 30 some odd years. That's what they started to call it when they first came out with it. But the model world you can only have one model world. So that's the place we're going to spend all of our time actually. But if you go to the layout world, and you can click on either layout 1 or layout 2, it takes you over to this. It might look a little different in your screen view, but this is basically where you would do your plotting from. And so people that do higher level CAD work, what they'll do is they'll create their model in model space, and then they'll put their title block and other information in paper space, and you'll print from here. We're not going to work with this, but you do notice it's got some differences in it. One of the big differences is when you're in this world is that it's a strictly two-dimensional kind of thing. So any 3D command is disabled when you are in layout. Also, like right now, if I have a drawing, I can't see it because I don't have what's called a viewport open to be able to see it in this. So sometimes people freak out and think, well, what happened to my drawing? Well, it's really still there. It's just back in model space. So if you, for some reason, do get in either layout 1 or layout 2, it's no big deal. We're just going to go ahead and go back to model. In fact, if you do not want one of these layouts, you can just delete them. Okay, so it's real simple. But we will spend all of our time here in this guy called model space. Okay, model space is fully three-dimensional. Layouts or paper space is strictly two-dimensional, X and Y values only. All right. So down here also, we're going to see this area, and this area is called your status bar. Excuse me, I forgot the name of it. So the status bar has little tools associated with it that allow you to, a lot of times, just turn things on and off, but also set up settings. Now we're going to be spending some time down here because occasionally we do work on stuff. But for instance, if you notice this guy right here, this guy is called your display grid. And right now my display grid is on. That's this guy up here. So if I don't want my grid, I just turn him off. So what that does is allows me to turn it on, turn it off. So these are what are called toggles. And a lot of those little commands, they're located down here in this guy called the status bar. Also over here, you have this group, this customization tool, which is sometimes referred to as the hamburger, because you have the two slices of bread and the piece of meat in between. But if you open up that, this is showing you what's currently on in the status bar and what you can turn on or off. So if you don't want certain things on there, you can turn it off. So for instance, if I turn on my coordinate display, notice I've just turned this on right now. And as you can see, as I move my cursor around, you might be able to notice that those are updating in terms of X's and Y's, but the Z's staying constant because I'm on a 0 plane right now. Okay, so you have that. One that I'm going to ask you guys to do if you have AutoCAD on is to turn this guy called the dynamic input on. All right, and the reason we're going to want that on is because we're going to actually turn it off. So this is the easiest way I know how to do it. So we're going into the status bar, turning on the dynamic input. So yours will probably be like that. Make sure you just click that, click outside of it, and this little tool is now there. What we want to do is turn that off. Okay. What that does is that thing will override you when you start dealing with coordinates, and we're going to be talking about coordinates here in a little bit. So I just want to make sure that we have that turned off, and I'll probably go back and revisit that before we start getting into coordinate issues. Okay, so we got one more quick area to look at, and before we get out of here, I'm talking about the graphical user interface, and that's this guy right here. This guy is called your UCS icon, and that stands for User Coordinate System Icon. And what it's showing you is the direction of positive X, is this way, positive Y, which is this way, and positive Z, which is coming at you. And it uses something called the right-hand rule. Some of you guys may have heard of that before. I'll show you guys how to do this on Wednesday. But it basically shows you if you orient your three fingers, your thumb, your middle, and your index finger 90 degrees with respect to each other. That is how those things line up, positive X, positive Y, positive Z. So this is an important little critter. He's what you call a virtual object. That means it doesn't really exist, and it means that it will never print, but it is helpful while you're working. So I know that if I'm going from left to right or right to left, I'm going in an X direction this way, I'm going in a Y direction. I can't really do a Z direction because of I only have a 2D mouse actually, but you can get 3D mouse that allows you to do true three-dimensional types of things. Again, we're not going to work with that. Be careful with this guy, because if you click him and you hit that little dot right there, notice I actually just changed the value of my UCS, and actually I can even move it. So I've really messed things up at this point if I've done something like that, okay? So because that guy's active, you can do things like that. So if you need to fix that, okay, this is kind of the first command we're going to learn. We're going to type in the word UCS and hit enter. And notice it has what are called sub options at the command line. You have origin, face, name, whatever. What's called the default is in those brackets. That's the world. You're just going to hit enter. And what that'll do is that'll say you're accepting the world as the default option, and it fixed it back. So this is what's called the world UCS. And that's the one we're always going to work in. So just, again, really be careful with this guy, because if you click on him, you can mess him up, and it can mess your drawing up, especially if you click on him in the middle of a drawing and you don't realize that you've done that. All of your coordinates can be off based on the fact of where that location is. We're going to be working with that UCS a little bit in a couple of the drawings, so we'll see how that works a little bit more. Okay. All right, so let's just review real quick, and then we're going to move on. This first area we looked at was the application menu, basically file handling types of things. Then we have next to that the quick access toolbar. Again, most of these are file handling. There's a few things on there, undo, redo, and the workspaces. Okay, and then again, you can customize that. You can add commands to that or delete commands from it. We have the title bar, which shows you the drawing you're currently working in. We have the info center, which allows you to search for information and also sign into your AutoCAD account. We have the major area where we're going to be dealing with in terms of menus, which is called the ribbon. The ribbon is broken down into tabs: home, insert, annotate. Each tab then is broken down into panels, and each panel then includes a bunch of commands that are associated with each thing that you're dealing with. Okay, so we're going to be spending a lot of time up here. By the time you get done with this, you're going to get real used to that. The view cube, okay, which is your orientation, the way you're looking. The UCS icon, which is really dealing with coordinates, okay, follows that right-hand rule kind of thing. This guy, which is called your graphic screen, this is your piece of paper, but remember, it's really not a piece of paper, it's actually a cube. Okay, so it's a cube of space, if you will. And then we have, this is this right here is the command line. This is going to be a really important area to deal with, especially as we start to type stuff in and take a look at it. And then we have model space and layout tabs. We're going to be exclusively in model, so we won't have to worry about that. But if you do get in layout, just click it back. And then we have the, again, I forgot to, this is the status bar. And the status bar, and this is allowing you to turn things on and off. It's going to be pretty useful. And again, make sure that you've got that dynamic input symbol out there and then turn it off, okay? Because we're going to start to take a look at that as we get into this. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to other material? That's probably right there one of the biggest issues when you start to learn AutoCAD, is understanding that, particularly the names of things, so that when I say go to the ribbon in this piece, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, no questions so far? Is everybody understanding this okay so far? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay. By the way, guys, it's really hard doing these lectures when I don't get any input. So if you do have, can give me some input, it sometimes helps me. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the mouse itself. If you have a mouse pointer, I have a mouse that I use. I don't use. I have a laptop, but I don't use the little pad with my finger because I have more flexibility. So I definitely recommend using a mouse. But the position of the cursor, this guy's called a cursor. The position of the cursor in AutoCAD makes a difference on what it's doing for you. So notice when I'm up in one of the command areas, it becomes what's called a pointer. So when you see a pointer, the pointer allows you to select things, okay? So notice up in here, it's a pointer. Here, it's a pointer, okay? Now you will see certain areas that changes. So if I go to here, that becomes what they call an I-beam. And when it comes down here, it becomes an I-beam. So when you see an I-beam, that allows you to type. Okay, so for instance, if I come down here, I can click there and I can say L-I-N-E. It allows me to type that, and then I can just go. But up here, when you see the pointer, you're selecting. So primarily, if you're using a mouse, that's a left click on your mouse. So if I want to grab the line command, I select that with the pointer by left clicking. Okay. When I'm down in here, the pointer becomes what's called a crosshair. And so this is your crosshair, and the location of the crosshair is what location you are, X, Y, and Z. So as I'm moving it around, and what we're doing right now, by the way, is called eyeballing. So I'm just kind of eyeballing a position wherever I'm moving my mouse, and it's tracking me. So the center point of the crosshair is the exact XYZ coordinate that you're seeing. And by the way, you might notice that I'm reading out to what, 4 decimal places. One thing to understand about AutoCAD is very precise. It works in 14 sig figs. So it uses 14 significant figures of value. So what you're seeing is only 5 sig figs of numbers, not 4 sig fig or 14. So it's actually working at a much higher level than what you're seeing, even though it's only set to display 4 decimal places. So you kind of got to watch that, because that's going to be a real eye-opener when you start to see what 14 sig figs do for you and to you sometimes. So in the middle of the crosshair it looks like a little box, and that box is called a pick box. So that pick box will be used to select objects or do things like that. So that pick box will have a secondary function. So that crosshair usually works like this, looks like this. You have the 2 lines that are crossing, and then you have the pick box, but you can edit that so that looks differently. But right now it's set to 5% of your zoom scale. In other words, 5% of the screen area. That's why it's as small as it is. As you zoom in and out, it's always going to stay the same size though. And if you don't want the pick box there, we can turn that off too, but it's going to be really useful to have that. Okay, so this is going to be important while we're working. So in this mode, we're picking or we're selecting. That's your pointer. In this mode, we're typing, and in this mode, we're drafting. Okay, so this is really the position of your pencil. Okay. Now, if you have a 3-button mouse like you will at school, and the one I have, the left click is a selection, and the right click will usually pop up this, which is called a shortcut menu. So when I left click, it's a selection tool. When I right click, I get a shortcut. And these are just other types of menus right here that you can use to grab things. So if I want to do something that I just did, like say repeat a line, I can just grab that really quick by doing that. Depending on where you are, your shortcuts will change. So notice if I bring it up here and I right click, I get a different group of shortcut menus than when I'm down here and I right click. And if I'm in my command line and I right click, I get a whole different group. And when we start placing things on the screen, we're going to see that shortcuts will really drastically change. So the type of shortcut and the number of shortcut menus that you get are going to be really useful. So another thing, if you have a middle mouse button, I have a little wheel on my middle mouse. That wheel can be used to zoom in and out. So if you roll the wheel away from you, you're doing what's called zooming in. If you roll the wheel towards you, you're zooming out. So in other words, I'm getting farther away from my object. Here I'm getting closer to my object. You can see the size of the grid is changing. So if you roll towards you, you're zooming out. If you roll towards the screen, you're zooming in. Now, when you get to GIS, that's going to be completely backwards. Okay, so it's going to go the other way. It still will zoom, but when you roll it in, it's going to zoom out, and when you roll it towards you, it's going to zoom in. So it's going to go backwards differently. But in AutoCAD, zoom in, zoom out based on whether you're okay. Also, you can take this guy and hold that wheel down, and when you do that, you'll notice I get this hand, and this is called a pan. What this pan is doing is allowing me to change the point of where I'm looking on an object. So I'm just like a camera panning from left to right. I'm panning it left to right. Now I'm not changing the magnification. Notice it's just panning. Okay. So that's called a pan. That's what they call a real-time pan, P-A-N, pan. If you double-click this guy real quick, you got to do it real quick. It's hard to do. I can't even get it to do it. It should do what's called a zoom extents, but it doesn't always work. Yeah, there it goes. Okay. So zoom extents will give you the biggest picture that you can with what you've got going on in it. And we'll talk about zooms. I'll be talking about zooms next week. So right now, all you have to worry about is being able to zoom in and zoom out with your mouse wheel. That's the easiest way to do that. Okay. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay, great. So here's another couple of things that you need to be aware of, because this happens, especially when you're starting in AutoCAD. If you got into something and you don't know what you're doing, you can stop it. So for instance, if I get into this command and it's all of a sudden doing this, and I don't even know what that ABC means. What's it asking me? Okay. To stop it, you can just hit the escape key on your keyboard. So somewhere, mine is on the top left-hand side of my keyboard. I just hit the escape key and it just terminates it. And actually, you can see it says cancel. So the escape key is a cancel in AutoCAD, and that's kind of like your safety valve. So if you ever get stuck, you don't know what's going on, and you want to halt the application, just make sure you hit the escape key. Sometimes it's good to do it twice. I just do escape, escape, and the reason is because sometimes you're 2 levels deep in something. So the first escape will take you back to the one point, and the second one gets you out all the way. Okay, so that's a good thing to know. All right. The other thing is, when you're typing in AutoCAD or when you're doing certain things, you might follow that up with the enter key. So for instance, if I come down here and I type in the word line, L-I-N-E, to execute it, I have to hit the enter key. Okay. Now, once I've done that, okay, now it's asking me to do something. Okay. So usually you're going to type something in and then hit the enter key on the keyboard. So another way of doing that is to just hit line and then hit the space bar. So the space bar in AutoCAD is exactly the same thing as the enter key, except when you get into text. So when we start doing this kind of stuff up here, text, then the space bar will actually function like a space bar. But when you're in a normal mode in AutoCAD, not doing text, enter key and the space bar are exactly the same. Okay? So those are important things to understand. One other thing is kind of neat too, is your F function keys, F1, 2, 3, 4, they all are mapped to do certain things. So for instance, if I hit the F7 key, you might notice that it turned my grid off. And you notice down there, it turned that button off. If I hit F7 again, it turns it on. So F7 is grid on, grid off, grid on, grid off. We can also use like the F2 key. This is doing what's called a command window. So what it does is it opens up my command line so I can see everything I've done from the very beginning of the session. So this is just like a set of instructions that you've been issuing. So F1, F2 opens, F1 F2 open, F2 close. That's your command line. F1 is a help screen. I don't like using this, but if you hit the F1 key, what it'll do is it'll open up your AutoCAD help. And it's not as bad as it used to be, but you have this and you can type in, like if you have a question, you can type in here. Let's say I want to do, what's the line command do for me? It says, oh, okay, well here it is, line command, what it'll do, it shows you how to do it. So this is really kind of like having a textbook right at your fingertips on anything that you need. So that's kind of a cool little thing. All right. So your function keys, like I said, just about every one of them is mapped to do something. I don't use them too much. You guys probably won't either, but we'll see how they work eventually when we get into some more things. All right, so we've talked a lot about the display and all this. So I want to start talking about a couple of key ideas. One is what we call an object. One is called extents. And the other thing we're going to talk about is what we call limits. Okay, so an object in AutoCAD is any little thing that you draw on the screen. Okay, so right now I have nothing on my screen, so I don't have any objects. But if I go here and I draw a circle, and I draw an arc, and I draw a line, these guys are all objects and they're all unique. So this is an object. Notice when I click on him, he becomes active, and it even tells me, oh, you just clicked on a line. I have a circle, and it tells me that this is a circle, and I click on an arc. Okay, so I now have 3 actual objects in my drawing. So anything basically out of this draw section that you create, that's going to create an object for you. Okay, so the best definition I've ever heard in AutoCAD of what an object is, you can think of it as what we call a basic drawing element. Okay, think of it as a basic drawing element, and just like elements in the periodic table, you really can't usually break them down into something different. Okay, so I cannot take this line and make it into something else. Okay, I can break it in 2 and have 2 lines, but I still basically have a line. Now there are a couple objects that's not totally true with. So for instance, this object right here is a circle. You can actually take a piece out of this circle and it will turn it into an arc. Okay, so it's not 100% across the board true, but most of them, whatever type of object you have, it usually stays the same. And all objects will have what we call properties associated with them. So for instance, if I look at this guy, we're looking at what we call properties right here. Each object has a name. In this case, it's circle. It has a color associated with it, what's called a layer, which is kind of like the piece of paper that it's being drawn on. What's called a line type, which is making this either dashed or spaced or somehow looks different. And then it has geometry associated with it. Notice a center point, X, Y, Z, a radius, a diameter, a circumference, an area. Those are all properties of that object. There's some more object properties that we'll be looking at. We will be looking at colors and layers and line types this semester. So we'll get into that later. But for right now, everything we're drawing is on what we call the 0 layer, and we're drawing it white, essentially. So these are all objects, and objects can be created through this, and then they can be destroyed or they can be edited through this. So for instance, if I want to get rid of that guy, he's gone. Or if I wanted to trim this guy or move him, what I can do is do things like move them. Okay, so I can edit those guys, I can move them around, I can change their size. Okay, so these guys can be destroyed, they can be edited, okay, or you can be adding them. So primarily when you add them, you're drawing. If you're editing them or modifying them, you're using the modify. So a lot of what we're going to be doing in AutoCAD this semester is drawing and editing or modifying. That's going to be what we're going to be looking at. So that's an object, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about first. So then we have 2 other concepts here that we have. One is called extents, and the other one is called limits, okay? So extents, let me flip over to something here real quick. Okay, so you have what are called extents. And you have limits. So Extents is related to objects. Limits is not. Extents is not a command. Limits is. So if you type in the word limits, you will actually get something that will pop up. Extents is based on the number of objects. So you can think of it this way. If you have, let's say, a line and a rectangle and an ellipse. The extents of these objects would be a rectangle that I could place around this thing that would comfortably surround it. So for instance, in this case, it might look something like this. Not quite. Usually it should be better looking than, it's going to be a rectangle though, okay? So that box basically represents the extents of my objects. If you go in and delete one of these objects, let's say for instance, if I go in and delete one of those objects, all right, then the extents changes. So now the extents would basically be that right there, okay? So the extents is related to the number of objects and the size of objects, but just the best way to think of extents is a box that comfortably surrounds all of the objects that are there. And you can think of it this way, essentially if you have no objects in your drawing, you really don't have any extents. So limits is a way of limiting your 2D space where you're going to work, okay? You can think of it as the size of your paper. And we don't really utilize it too much in AutoCAD anymore, but we used to a lot, but it's really convenient for printing. But what we basically have is what's called the lower left corner. So this is your lower left, and this would be like 0, 0. And then you have the upper right corner, and this is 12, 9. Those are called your default limits. So if you turn your limits on, what's called limits checking, that means you cannot draw outside of this boundary, okay? Now, this is only 2D, so this is X and Y and X and Y. 3D is not locked down with limits, just your X's and Y's. So when we go back to AutoCAD here, notice right now, I'm going to show you, I can't really get you extents, but I'm going to show you. That's essentially my extents, okay? And if I delete this object, now you can see what my extents, so you can see how that's changing. But if I type in the word limits, which is what I'm typing in limits, notice it asks me to specify a lower left corner, and it tells me that the default values right now are 0, 0. So if I accept that by just hitting enter, it'll show me what my upper right is set to currently, 12, 9. So limits are always turned on, but you don't always use them. So notice also there is an on and an off. If I turn my limits on, I don't think it'll let me because I think I'm outside of those values. It won't let me because I don't think it did. But anyway, that means I couldn't draw outside of it. But we're not going to be utilizing limits all that much because, well, we will be using it. I take that back. I'm going to have you set limits up because it's a way of setting up the size of your paper. Like if you're working on a 8.5 by 11 size sheet or 24 by 36, you can do it with limits. But what we're going to be doing is using it primarily for plotting. Okay, so that'll be the main issue. So again, a couple things to remember with limits and extents. Extents is the collection of all the objects that exist in your drawing, and they change with the number of objects and the location of those objects. Okay, you don't really see this box. And when we get to a command called zoom, there will be what's called a zoom extents. So that'll show you what's going on. So this is not a command. If you typed in the word extents, it'll tell you unknown command. So limits is a way of limiting what you draw within, like setting up a physical piece of paper, if you will. And it only limits the X and Y space. It doesn't limit the Z space. And unless you turn it on, even though you have these guys in place, it's still allowing you to draw outside of it. Okay? So limits is a command, extents is not. limits are set by the user, extents are not really. They're determined by the number of objects and the placement of the objects, okay? So if we typed in limits, we'd see that there's a limits command. If I typed in the word extents, notice what will happen when I do that. It'll tell me that that's an unknown command, okay? But the concept does exist out there, okay? Is everybody with me on that? Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, so that brings us up to coordinates. So we're going to take a look at coordinates. So what I would like you to do, have available or print it if you got the ability to do that. Pull up this guy. We're going to take a look at some coordinate issues real quick. And that might be all we get into tonight. Well, depending on how quick we go through this, I might get into the line and arc a little bit tonight, or circle. But I'll definitely finish up with those things on Wednesday, first thing, okay? So yeah, go ahead if you've got that printed out, or just leave it open as a tab that you can refer to. So let me talk about coordinates a minute. Let me go back to this guy and show you a little bit about that. So AutoCAD can work in 5 different coordinate systems, and did the wrong one here. 5 different coordinate systems, but we're only going to look at 2. So we're going to look at what's called rectangular, which probably most of you are familiar with. And the other one is called polar, which a lot of people, that's probably the one that's a little bit confusing. And we're going to look at these as 2-dimensional coordinates, okay? Both of these are going to be 2-dimensional types. Now you can talk about 3-dimensional rectangular coordinates. If you talk about 3D polar coordinates, then those are called cylindrical coordinates. And then you have another option there called spherical coordinates, which we're not going to be getting into at all. So let's take a look at rectangular first real quick, and we'll follow it up with polar. So first off, real quick, just to kind of review for people, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this, but we're going to look at the grid here real quick. So we have 2 axes, which are technically called abscissa and ordinate axis, but we usually just refer to them as the x-axis and the y-axis. Okay, so where they cross, that's called your origin, and we think that that has a value of 0, 0 under the rectangular system. If you have a point out here that's located with respect to that, okay, that point right there has a value associated with it. So if we measure the distance from the origin in the x, let's say that that's got a distance of 5 units. And from that origin up in the y direction, that's, let's say, 2 units. So we would give this guy a value of 5, 2. So we always express the x first and the y second. So if we have another point here, we can do the same thing. We can measure the distance from the origin to that point. Let's say that's 10. Oops. Let me do this first. Okay, so let's say this distance is now 10 units. And this distance, let's say, is now 12. So this coordinate now has a value of 10, 12. So knowing this allows us to plot things very rapidly. Okay, so that's really, AutoCAD's going to depend on that a lot, or you're going to be putting that in, so you know how to do that. Now, if you're going from 5, 2 to 10, 12, you could actually just subtract this. And if I subtract these 2, that would be 5 units. And if I subtract the 10, let's see, the 12 from the 2, this will be 10 units. Another way of expressing that from this point to this point would be at 5, 10. Now, in math, a lot of times they would call this delta x, delta y, and this would be your x and y. So AutoCAD allows you to do the same thing. So for the rectangular system, you can have what's called an absolute entry or what we call a relative entry. So the absolute entry would just be your x value, comma, your y value, okay? So your x value, comma, y, you would enter that. Your relative, you would always use the at symbol and then the x, comma, y. So this symbol is telling you you are not measuring from the origin, you're measuring from this point to that point. That's what that means, relative. So that relative is really nice because it allows you to do things really rapidly. Sometimes you know absolute coordinates, sometimes you know relative, sometimes you know both. And what AutoCAD allows you to do is go back and forth between the two systems. Okay, so understand these are still the same system. They're still rectangular coordinates. They're just a different mode or a different way of doing it. Okay.
I got a question. It's not really relative. Are you using the mouse to write this?
I'm using, it's a good question actually. I'm using you see this down here? Can you see that pencil? That's a little program that's an Autodesk program. It's called Autodesk Sketchbook.
Okay.
And I've got this tablet that
Yeah, I was hearing the scratches, so I was kind of confused. Like, is he writing this or is he using the mouse? Okay.
no,
Yeah, I
no,
got it.
it's a tablet, and then it has a stylus that writes on top of it. It's a pretty cool little tool. It allows me to like have a piece of paper or like a blackboard, right? A whiteboard, if you will, and
No
it
way.
allows me to do that. So it's pretty good, isn't it? Works pretty
That's pretty
well.
awesome.
Yeah. That little tablet, I can get you. I think it was like $75. I've been using this since we went into this COVID mode, and it actually works really well for this stuff. So, no, that's a great question. I love it. So, all right. Anything else?
Oh, no, that was it.
All right, cool. All right, so we're gonna let's take a look at Polar real quick, and then I'll show you some things about that. Now, Polar, for most people, is a little bit sketchier. So let me let's just go for a new system here. All right, so Polar, we can think that we still have that. I think you have your X and the Y, except we really deal a little differently. So in this case, normally you don't even think about the Y. X is all important, but X will be 0 degrees. And Y, you can think of having a Y, but this is still my origin. Okay, that's still 0, 0. But when you define a point up here using a polar coordinate, what you're going to do is measure a distance from the origin to the point, and this will be a distance. Sometimes that's defined as radius. I'm just going to call it distance. Get into that mode. So this is the distance or the radius, and then you measure an angle off of the x-axis, usually expressed in degrees or degrees minutes seconds. It might be one of the other units that are commonly used. So for instance, let's say if this is 30 degrees and this is 52 feet, this coordinate would be 52 less than 30. That's how you express that in AutoCAD. So this is telling you to go that amount of distance and that angle. Now, if anybody's ever used polar coordinates, they can be kind of nasty because there's more than one way to get to that same point depending on how you define coordinates. So for instance, we could come from 0 going this way, which would be a negative 330. So if I go this way, it's positive. If I go this way, it's negative because of right-hand rule. So what that would be 52 units less than negative 330 degrees. Does everybody see how that worked? This is pretty tough. This gets kind of tough. And actually, there's actually 2 more ways of doing this. Because you can send this line in this direction. You can measure this angle, and then you can do a negative distance. So you can do it 4 different ways to get to the same point. Now the reality is that you're never really going to do it 4 different ways. If somebody gives you 30 degrees positive and 52 feet, that's what you're going to use. Okay. The other thing with polar coordinates, You can also have an absolute mode and a relative mode. So the absolute mode is going to be distance less than angle. And the relative mode is going to use the at symbol, distance less than angle. Now, you're going to use this mode way more than you're going to use this. We almost never use this, but we will be utilizing this. And I'm going to have you do drawings where you're doing all of these kinds of different things, okay? So that's kind of an important aspect. All right, is everybody okay with that?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's flip back to AutoCAD. And I want to, first of all, if you've been doodling around with your screen like I have, I want you guys to do a couple things. If you don't have it on, that's fine, but I'm going to delete everything. So I'm just going to hit E, enter, and then the word all, and enter twice. So that'll kill everything. Then I'm going to do what's called a zoom extents. Just type in Z, enter, E, enter, and you should see a screen like that. So if you were playing around, you should be back in business, okay? If you don't have AutoCAD, like I said, don't worry about it. I'm going to pick up with this a lot on Wednesday because, like I said, they're over half the class is not here tonight. So they're going to probably be pretty lost if we don't go through some of this again, okay? All right, so that sample coordinate thing, what we're going to do is I want to step around this thing. We're going to start at this point, 2, 2. That's going to be an absolute coordinate. And then we're going to go to point B, determine its absolute coordinate, and then absolute coordinate, absolute coordinate. So we're going to just walk around. And we're going to do this with absolute coordinates first. And then we're going to do this secondarily with relative Cartesian coordinates. And then I'm going to thirdly do this with polar coordinates to show you the differences, okay? And see if you think one methodology is better than the other, okay? Is anybody doing this with me? So I don't want to get too far behind. If you're just watching, you guys mostly just watching me right now?
Yeah.
I'm just watching.
Okay. All right, so
Yeah.
then I'll just go ahead and do it. And then if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay, but if you have that sample coordinate input sheet out, just go ahead and you can answer some questions for me. So I'm gonna do a simple command called the line command. So when I go to the line command, it asks me to specify a point. Well, the point I want to start at is at point A. So I'm gonna just type in 2, 2, and then hit enter. So notice it blips me in right at 2, 2, and when I pull my cursor out, this is what we call a rubber banded cursor. You notice it's fixed like it stuck a pin in at that point, and then it's like a rubber band. So I want to go from A to B. Can anybody tell me what the X and Y coordinate is of B with respect to A? If we're sitting at 2 in the X and 2 in the Y, what would be the coordinates of B, X, and
Is it
Y?
2, 4?
Nope. Well, 2 in the X plus 6 in the X would give us what?
8.
All right, so that would be my X coordinate. And the Y coordinate, assuming that A and B are at the same elevation or the same level, they're going to have the same number. So B would be at 8, 2. Does everybody see how I'm getting that? So if I type in 8 in the X, 2 in the Y, notice it just goes straight over 8, 8, 2. So the other thing to recognize is by looking at this diagram, we're having to do a little bit of math, okay? And that's not necessarily always a good thing. So in other words, we're going to see that there's going to be better ways of doing some of this. Did everybody see how I got that number? 8, 2?
Yes.
Okay, so now I want to go from B to C, and notice it's 2 over in the X and 2 up in the Y. So if we're sitting at 8, and 8 plus 2 gives us 10, and we're sitting at 2 in the Y, and 2 plus 2 gives us 4. So C should be 10, 4. So if I type in 10, 4 and hit enter, notice it took me up diagonally like that. Does everybody see how that worked?
Yep.
So now I'm sitting at 10, 4, and I want to go just straight up. So the x coordinate isn't changing, so it's still going to be 10,
10, 6.
10, 6, because yeah, because we're adding another, that's correct. Okay, so we're going to add 2, all right? So now we're sitting at 10, 6. So now we want to go back 5 units in the x, so 10 minus 5 is 5,
5, 6.
but we're still at 6, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we just type that in and hit, okay. So now we want to go back to the starting point here. So how could we do that? Anybody tell me?
Did we hit enter 2, 2 again?
We absolutely could. That would take us right back. Okay, that's cool. So here's the other thing. You might notice in this command, there's a little option called close. Okay, so what close allows me to do is bring it right back to that point that we started from without typing in anything. So notice when I click that, bam, it brought me right back to the 2, 2. Okay. So this is utilizing those rectangular coordinates, but we're doing it as an absolute mode. And we're having to do a lot of math. Notice that. So that's not always necessarily a good thing because I could make a simple mistake, an addition, or I just, for one thing, I really just don't want to do all that work. Okay, so I'm going to contrast that. I'm going to undo this or just erase it. Just going to erase it. I'm going to redo this, but I'm going to do this time following through with what we call relative coordinates. So now I'm going to start out at 2, 2 because that is my specific point. So I'm going to go into the line command. I'm going to type again 2, 2 and hit enter. So notice that takes me to that point. There's my rubber banded cursor again. But now to get from A to B, what you can do is think, instead of the origin being over here, think that the origin is where 2, 2 is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say at, so I'm going to use the at symbol, and then my x value is the distance from A to B, which would be how many units on that diagram? What's the distance from A to B in that diagram? Right there, 6 units, right? So I'm going to say at 6, comma, can anybody tell me what the y value is from A to B? Are we increasing in y or are we decreasing in y?
Staying the same.
Yes, so if it's staying the same, that means it's 0 because you're not going up and you're not going down, okay? So I would type in 0. So notice my input here is at 6, 0. So if you think about that, that was a lot simpler than having to do all that math because it just said, hey, I want to go the distance from A to B, not from the origin to B. So there's a big difference. Now watch how easy it is to do C. Okay, so I'm going to say at, anybody take a guess? To get from B to C?
2, 2.
Yes, absolutely. 2 in the x, comma 2 in the y. Now again, remember, what that's saying is we're coming from this point, not from the origin. So if I do 2, 2, wham, look how easy that is. So you can hopefully already see that what this is doing is just really lightening my load. It's making it so much simpler and I don't have to worry about doing any math so much, okay? All right, so we're gonna go from C to D now. What's
0,
happening
2.
here? 0, 2, you got it, that's perfect. 0, 2, 0, 2, all right? What about this last one? Oops, I brought
Going
up something.
down 5, so -5, 0.
-5, 0, let's see, negative, so I'm gonna say at -5. Yep, that certainly makes sense, and the 0 means we're not changing, right?
Yes.
Let's see if that works. Yeah, absolutely did. All right, you got the idea. That's perfect. So now then I can just go back and again, I could type in 2, 2, or we can just do that little trick in this command that's called close. So theoretically, these two objects, if I had the first one on there, should be sitting right on top of the other one. But I think you might agree, wasn't that second way of doing it a lot simpler than the first way?
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now here's the cool thing about this, that as you get into this, you can go back and forth between absolute and relative coordinates anytime you want. The only difference is whether you use the @ symbol or you don't use the @ symbol. So you don't have to, you know, if you start out as relative coordinates, you don't have to continue as relative coordinates, okay? All right, so let's do one more method. Now, I think you'll probably find this the most challenging because you have to think a little bit differently and you have to think about angles that a lot of people, you know, they're not as used to that. Okay, keep in mind that the x-axis is where 0 is also. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this figure. And we're going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to start at A and walk around this using polar coordinates. So I'm going to start out with my line, go into 2, 2, okay, start that out. And I want to go from A to B utilizing a polar coordinate. Now, what I said before is that you almost always, like 99% of the time, you're going to use relative polar coordinates, not absolute. So that means I'm going to be using that @ symbol, okay? So what is the distance in terms of distance from A to B? That's just 6, right? That's 6.
Yes.
Now, because this is a polar coordinate, I have to use the less than symbol. So on my keyboard, I have to find that less than symbol. So what would the angle be? That angle, remember, is you're going in the x direction at 0. So we're assuming that that x is, that A to B is parallel with x, right? So that would be 0, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And yeah, so you can see that took it that way. All right, so now this is where it gets, we have to think about this a little bit. Notice we're going to go from B to C. In B to C, we have an angle and a distance given. So notice that distance is 2.8284. Now, from a math standpoint, you would call that a hypotenuse. Does everybody agree with that? Because we have two legs that are 2 and 2, right? So that's a hypotenuse. And we have a 45-degree angle. So I have to make sure I type that in properly. So I'm going to say at, and the distance is going to be 2.8284 less than 45 degrees. Okay, and it took me that way. All right, did everybody see how I did that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go from C to D. So again, why we're doing this is because we're going to be utilizing these concepts as we get into this. So I'm going to always have you do different types of things that we're going to be dealing with. Even in that first lab, you're going to be dealing with polar coordinates and rectangular coordinates. So it'll be important to get a handle on this, but you will over time. So if you're not picking this up right away, you will eventually, okay? So I am sitting at C, I want to go to D. So the distance from C to D is obviously 2, but what's the angle from C to D?
90.
90, everybody agree with that? Positive 90 or negative?
Positive.
Yes, positive was work. Now, what else could you use? And can you think of another angle you could use? If you came around in a negative direction, what would you come around?
270.
Yes, it would be what? Negative
270.
Right. So remember now, there would be 3 other ways to do this.
Yeah.
Obviously, 90 is the easiest one to see, so I'm going to go with 92. I'm going to just use that as well. Okay. All right, so here we go. So now we're sitting at D. We need to go 5 units, right? What would be the angle here?
At 5 less than negative 180.
Okay, you could use negative 180, or you could also use positive 180, because essentially those will be exactly the same line. So you could use either one, okay? So I'm going to use positive 180 just to show you. Now, if you use 0, it wouldn't go that direction. It would shoot the other direction, so it would be pretty obvious, okay? And then, again, to close this, very simply, I could just close it. All right, so I'm going to ask you guys a question. Do you think if we did these all on top of each other, that they would be sitting directly on top of each other or not. If we did the first method using rectangular coordinates, and then we did the second one using, well, the first one using rectangular absolute, and we used relative, and then we used polar relatives. Do you think all three of those would be exactly the same?
Yeah, I think so.
They should be, right? Technically, right? Did I hear a no?
That is correct.
Yes, well, you know this, right? You've seen this before, right?
Is it because of the origin?
It's not because of the
Of this?
origin, okay? It's not because of, but let me do something here, okay? So let's just do something. I'm gonna change a color up here real quick, okay? Just let me do I'm gonna create a real quick layer. And I wanna show you something that's actually pretty interesting because, again, this has to do with something in AutoCAD that a lot of you probably never experienced before, but we are gonna experience this as you get into this. So I'm gonna draw this same object right on top of this one. So I'm gonna go into the line command, start out at 2, 2, and then I'm gonna say at 6, 0. So I'm using my relative Cartesians, and then I'm gonna say at 2, 2. So far it looks like they're right on top of each other, right? And then we're gonna say 0, 2, and then I'm going to say ultimately -5, 0. And then I'm going to close it. Looks like they're right on top of each other, right? So let's take a look at this. If I go over to this corner and I zoom up and I zoom up and I zoom up and I zoom up, wow, what's going on here? They're not sitting on top of each other, are they? Ian, you said they weren't. Do you know why?
I forget. One's not accurate than the other.
Yeah, it has to do with it's not an accuracy issue, it's a precision issue. Okay. So because the one was drawn based on limited significant figures, the one that white was drawn with limited significant figures, and the one in red was drawn out all the way. What you're looking at is the difference between 14 sig figs. So why is the white diagonal line shorter than the red? Because if you notice on my diagram, I gave you a hypotenuse of what? 2.8284. If you took 2 and squared it and add 2 squared again and took the square root, you're not actually getting 2.8284. You're going to get a number that's going to what? Float out a whole lot more. So AutoCAD is drawing this thing in 14 sig figs. You guys see the difference? Notice what happens when I go up to here. It gets worse as we go along because what's happening once we've introduced that air is across the board. Do you see that? You guys understand that?
Yes.
Yeah. It's probably never had to deal with anything like this before, but you will in AutoCAD because that's an important function, okay?
So which one is more precise?
Well, the one that's probably the better one is the red one, okay? Do you know why I'm saying that?
I do not.
Okay, because if you notice down here, what I told you is that this distance was 2 units and that distance was 2 units. So by doing 2 units in X and 2 units in Y, AutoCAD actually calculated the hypotenuse out to a better value than limiting it to 4 decimal places like I did. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. So everything else, is really equal, but that's the point that really got me. Okay. And that's the issue. Those are the kind of things that you can run into when you start getting into AutoCAD. That's what that really comes down to. All right. It's pretty much of an eye opener, isn't it? The way that works sometimes. Okay, so we got a chance to take a look at the line command, and basically the line command is pretty simple. That's one of your most basic objects that you're going to look at. I'm going to pick up and do the arc, circle, and rectangle command on Wednesday. Okay, so I'll just start out doing that with you guys. Okay. One other thing before we get out of here that I want to go over is the units. Okay, and then if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer those. So units allows you to input information or display information in different unit values. So AutoCAD really doesn't work in any unit, although technically it works in inches. But you know, it doesn't really matter as long as you know what unit you want to work in. So if you type in the word units, probably the easiest way to find this, I'm just going to type in the word units and hit enter. There are two types of units that you have here. One is called a linear or your length unit, and the other one is your angle, okay? So right now they are both set to what's called decimal degrees and decimal units. So each unit type, linear, length, or angular, those guys have 5 different types of units you can work in. So notice if I drop this guy down, I've got architectural, decimal, engineering, fractional, and scientific. So depending on what I'm doing, I can change that up. So there's only 2 units in here that actually have real world units associated with them. That would be architectural, which is working in a feet and a fractional inch system. And then you have what's called engineering, which is working in a feet and a fractional and a decimal inch system. Everything else, the decimals unitless, the fractional is unitless, and the scientific is unitless. Okay, so in other words, one decimal unit could equal 1 foot, it can equal 1 mile, it could equal 1 meter. So you can have it equal anything you want it to, essentially. Although you can tell it to be based on something down here. So notice you all have all these different things. So basically 1 decimal unit right now is 1 inch. But if I want that to be millimeters, then I can say, okay, that's 1 millimeter, all right? The other thing, oh, I'm sorry, take that back. That has to do with insertions. So that really doesn't impact you. So yeah, it just is insertions. The other thing you notice is there's what we call precisions. So notice you can go from 0 precision up to 8 decimal place precision. Now I just got through saying that you are dealing with 14 sig figs. So what this is what we call display precision, not ultimate precision. So in other words, you can display it out to 8 decimal places, but it's still going to calculate things out 14 sig figs. You can do the same thing on most calculators. So you can set your calculator to display 2 decimal places, but it's probably carrying it out maybe 10 decimal places, something like that. Okay, does everybody get the idea? So this is, again, this is displayed precision, not ultimate precision. Ultimate precision is 14 sig figs. With the angle types, there's probably some you haven't heard of in here. Decimal degree, degree minutes second, you're probably used to those. Grads, grads is more like the European counterpart to the decimal system. In this country, we use either the decimal degree or degree minutes seconds, but you know, European, a lot of applications they use grads. And in a grad system, 1 circumference of a circle is 400 grads instead of, we think of a circle being 300 degrees around, and in the grad it's 400, so that's a difference. The other thing is the grads is a decimal system. Then radians, I'm sure you've heard of radians before. Those are, you're using radians primarily when you're doing math type applications. You know, if 2 pi radians is equal to 360 degrees, those kind of things. Then we have what's called surveyor's units, and these are probably ones you've not heard of before. What we actually, I'm a surveyor, so we don't call them surveyor's units, we actually call them bearings. We're going to draw a couple of drawings where we utilize these. So we're going to do some in decimal, some in this, and some in surveyor's units, so you get the idea. But again, when you pick the whatever unit you're in, then you can put the precision right here. So degree, minute, second, all right? Also notice this with angles, there's this little button that says clockwise. If you toggle that on, that can really mess things up. Does anybody know what that's doing? If I toggle that clockwise on? That is converting right-hand rule to left-hand rule. So what that says is that your angles are going counterclockwise or clockwise rather, they're going positively. So normally in AutoCAD, we think that if we go this way, you know, from X up like that, that's positive. When you toggle that on, you're going actually this way positively. So normally that's going to be checked off. Okay. So we'll talk a lot more about this on Wednesday. So does anybody have any questions before we terminate the lecture for today?
I don't. I'm good.
Okay. Everybody else?